They came on a Sunday. My daughter-in-law brought a casserole, which should have told me everything I needed to know. She had not brought food to my house in 11 years of marriage to my son. Not once. Not for Christmas. Not when I had my hip replaced. Not when my husband passed and the neighbors filled my kitchen with enough food to last a month. She had never once stood at my stove and offered anything. So when she walked through my front door holding a glass dish covered in foil, smiling the way people smile in waiting rooms, I knew the casserole was not about kindness. My son set it on the counter without looking at me. He pulled out a chair at my kitchen table, the table where I had fed him oatmeal every morning for 18 years, and he sat down with the posture of a man who had rehearsed what he was about to say. I let them talk. I am 68 years old. I have been a widow for 4 years. My husband Gerald died on a Tuesday in October, quietly, the way he had done most things. We had been married 41 years. I raised 2 children in this house, a boy named Daniel and a girl named Patricia who lives in Portland now and calls on birthdays if she remembers. Daniel married a woman named Renee 12 years ago. I tried in the beginning. I brought them soup when they moved into their first apartment. I watched their dog when they went to Cancun. I asked questions about her work and remembered the answers. After a while, I stopped trying so hard because the trying never seemed to go anywhere, and I am too old to perform warmth for an audience that is not watching. The house is mine. I want to be clear about that because it matters to everything that comes after. Gerald and I bought it in 1987 for $84,000. We painted every room ourselves. We replaced the roof twice. We put in a new kitchen in 2003, and I picked the countertops myself, a pale green that everyone said looked wrong and that I have loved every single day since. The house is in my name alone. Gerald and I had a lawyer draw up the paperwork years ago after Gerald's mother had trouble with her estate, and we saw what that kind of trouble looked like up close. The house is mine. The savings are mine. I am not a woman who needs to be managed. Daniel cleared his throat. He said he and Renee had been talking. He said they were worried about me. He used the word concerned several times in the careful way people use words when they want to sound caring, while saying something cruel. He said the house was too big. He said the stairs were a liability. He used that word too, liability, as though I were a problem on a balance sheet rather than his mother. Renee nodded along. She had not touched the casserole since she set it down. Daniel said they had looked into some options. He slid a brochure across the table. It had a photograph on the front of an elderly woman sitting in a garden, smiling the empty smile of a woman paid to sit in a garden and smile. Meadow Glen Senior Living. I did not pick it up. He said the house would sell quickly in this market. He said he had already spoken to someone, a real estate agent, a friend of a friend, who thought they could get a good price. He said the money would cover the facility for years and that whatever was left, well, they could figure that out later. He said this, the way you say something you have already figured out. I asked him when he had spoken to a real estate agent. He looked at Renee. Renee looked at the table. He said a few weeks ago, just to get an idea, just to be informed. I nodded. I looked at the brochure on the table and I thought about the green countertops and the oak tree in the backyard that Gerald planted the year Daniel was born. I thought about my bedroom, where I still sleep on my side of the bed out of 40 years of habit. I thought about my neighbor Ruth, who brings me tomatoes in August and sits on my porch and talks to me like I am a person. I did not say any of that. I said, let me think about it. Daniel looked relieved, which told me he had expected more resistance. Renee picked up her fork and finally took a bite of the casserole. I thought about it all week. Not whether to go, I had no intention of going anywhere, but about what exactly was happening and what I needed to do about it. I am not a person who moves quickly. Gerald used to say I was the most patient woman he had ever met, and he meant it as a compliment, though I know some people would not take it as one. I sat with what I knew and I tried to be accurate about it. Daniel was not a bad person. He was a person who had married someone who was good at pointing him in directions, and he had been pointed in this direction, and he did not have enough sense or enough courage to question it. That was its own kind of failure. But understanding it did not mean I had to walk into it. I called Patricia in Portland. I told her what had happened. There was a pause. She said, God, Mom, that's a lot. I waited for more. More did not come. She said she would call Daniel and I told her not to, that I was handling it, and she sounded relieved about that, the way people sound relieved when they are let off a hook they were hoping to escape. I said goodbye and I sat in my kitchen for a long time after. There is a particular kind of loneliness in being a mother. Not the loneliness of being alone. I have been alone before and it does not frighten me, but the loneliness of having given something enormous and finding out it was not received the way you gave it. Gerald and I had put everything into those two children, not money, though we had given them that too, as much as we could. I mean the deeper things, the attention, the patience, the years of small daily acts that do not have names but that add up, over time, to a life that someone built for you. I had thought they understood that. I had thought, without ever examining the thought closely, that they knew. I understood that week that they did not know. Or they had forgotten. Either way, it came to the same thing. I made an appointment. I had used the same attorney, a woman named Carol Briggs, for over 15 years. She had handled Gerald's estate and she had known me long enough to skip the preliminaries. I sat across from her desk and I told her what Daniel had said and what he had done, the real estate agent, the brochure, all of it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set down her pen. She said, Dorothy, you are under no legal obligation to do anything he has asked. I told her I understood that. She said, Is there a power of attorney in place? I said there was not. Gerald and I had discussed it but never finalized one. It was on a list of things we kept meaning to do and did not get to before he died. She nodded. She said that was actually useful information, given the circumstances. She said that without a power of attorney, Daniel had no legal authority over my finances, my property, or my living arrangements. She said his conversations with real estate agents were meaningless without my signature. She said she wanted to make sure I understood all my options, not just the obvious one. I told her I was listening. She talked for a while. She explained things clearly and without condescension, which I appreciated. By the time I left her office, I had a plan. Not a dramatic plan. Not a vengeful one. I am not a vengeful person, and I want to be careful to say that because I think the story I am telling could be mistaken for one about revenge, and it is not. It is a story about a woman who decided to be precise. Over the following weeks, I did several things. I updated my will. I had not touched it since Gerald died, and it needed updating regardless. I made specific provisions. I was careful and deliberate, and I will not detail everything here because some of it is private. But I will say that the house and its disposition were addressed in terms that left no ambiguity. I also established a trust. Carol walked me through it carefully. The trust meant that the house, while still mine to live in for as long as I chose, was structured in a way that could not be easily overturned or transferred without a process that would take considerably longer and be considerably more complicated than Daniel seemed to understand. I signed the documents in Carol's office on a Wednesday morning. Her paralegal witnessed them. I had coffee from the machine in the waiting room. It tasted like burnt paper, and I did not mind at all. Then I did something I had not done in a long time. I called Ruth. Ruth is 73 and has lived next door to me for 22 years. Her husband, Frank, died 6 years ago, and we had become closer after that, the way women sometimes do when they share the same kind of absence. She came over that evening, and I told her what was happening. Not all of it, but enough. She sat at my kitchen table, and she was angry on my behalf in a way that I found, unexpectedly, very comforting. It is a gift, someone else's clean anger when you have had to keep your own so carefully contained. She said, What are you going to do? I told her what I had already done. Her eyebrows went up. She said, You did all that already? I told her I was 68, not dead. She laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in several weeks, and I had not realized how much I needed to until I was doing it. A month after the Sunday visit, Daniel called. He asked if I had thought more about Meadow Glen. He used a careful voice, the kind that is meant to sound gentle and instead sounds like something being managed. I told him I had been thinking about it. I told him I had decided he was right, that we should move forward. There was a pause on the line, and then he said, Really? And the relief in that one word told me everything about what the conversation had cost him to initiate. He had been afraid I would fight him. He had been prepared for a fight. The absence of a fight made him careless. He said they would set things in motion with the real estate agent. I said, "All right." He said he would bring the paperwork by at the end of the week. I said, "That's fine." I want to describe what I felt in that moment, because I think it is important and because it is not what you might expect. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel angry. I felt something quieter than either of those things. I felt like a woman who had stopped waiting for someone else to determine what happened to her life. That feeling, I have come to understand, is what people are really talking about when they talk about taking care of yourself. Not bubble baths or long walks, though those have their place. The real thing is the decision to be the author of your own situation, to stop narrating from the passenger seat. Daniel brought the papers on a Friday evening. Renee was with him. She was dressed as though she had come from work, which I suspected was deliberate, a reminder that she was busy and this was an accommodation she was making. I offered them coffee. Renee said they couldn't stay long. Daniel spread the papers on the table. He pointed to the lines that needed my signature. He explained them briefly, though his explanation left out several things that someone reading carefully might have noticed. I read everything. I took my time. Daniel shifted in his chair. Renee examined something on her phone. I signed where he indicated. Daniel collected the papers and put them in his bag. He looked lighter than he had in months. He gave me a small smile, the relieved smile of a man who believes the complicated part is over. He said he would be in touch about next steps. He said it wouldn't take long, that the market was good. He was already looking past me to the door when he said it. I said good night. I watched them back out of the driveway from the window next to the front door. The porch light caught the frost on the grass. The closing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Daniel had arranged it. He came to my house first to pick me up because he wanted to be present and because I had not objected. We drove to the title company in his car, and he talked about the weather, and I looked out the window at the town I had lived in for 30 years, the library where I had taken Daniel as a child every Saturday morning, the church where Gerald and I were married, the diner on Elm where I still have breakfast on Thursdays with a woman named June from my old book club. The title company had a conference room with a long table and chairs that were slightly too large for the room. The buyers were already there. A young couple. Early 30s, the woman visibly pregnant. They smiled at me. I smiled back. Daniel sat beside me. He had brought Renee, who sat on his other side. The title officer, a woman named Sandra, came in with a folder. She was professional and efficient, and she went through the documents in order, explaining each one before she passed it across the table. When she came to the section covering the property deed and title transfer, she paused. She said there was a matter she needed to raise before proceeding. Daniel looked up. Sandra explained, in her professional and efficient way, that a title search had revealed a trust instrument recorded against the property. She said that trust contained specific provisions governing transfer. She said those provisions had not been disclosed in the original listing or the purchase agreement. She said that under the terms of the trust, the property could not be transferred by sale without the written consent of the trustee, which was not Daniel, and without a specific process being followed that had not been followed here. The room was quiet. Daniel said, "What?" Sandra looked at me. I said, "I set up a trust a few weeks ago. I should have mentioned it sooner. I'm sorry for any inconvenience." Daniel turned to look at me. He had a particular expression I had not seen on his face since he was a teenager, the expression of someone who has discovered that the ground they were standing on was not what they thought it was. He said, "Mom." I said, "Yes." He said, "You didn't tell me." I said, "No, I didn't. I thought about it." I decided this was better. The young couple was very quiet. The pregnant woman had her hand on her husband's arm. Sandra was looking at a point somewhere between us with the practiced neutrality of someone who has witnessed family matters before and has learned to be furniture. Daniel said, "This isn't you." Agreed. "You signed the papers." I said, "I signed the papers you brought. Those papers transferred what you believed you had the right to transfer. The trust was separate. I filed it first." There was another long silence. I want to say something about that silence. I have thought about it often in the months since. It was not a comfortable silence, not for anyone in that room. I was not comfortable. I was a 68-year-old woman sitting at a conference table who had just watched her son understand that he had underestimated her, and there is nothing comfortable about watching your child learn something like that about himself. I did not enjoy it. I want to be honest about that, because the story might seem from the outside like a victory, and in a practical sense it was, but the feeling inside it was not clean. It was the feeling of something that should not have been necessary. The closing did not proceed that day. The buyers were upset, and I do not blame them. Their agent called Daniel afterward, and there were conversations I was not part of. There were legal questions. There was a period of several weeks that I will not detail fully, except to say that Carol Briggs earned her fee several times over during that period, and that when it was finished, the house was still mine and my name was still on everything that mattered. Daniel called me once, about 3 weeks after the title company. He did not call to apologize, not in any complete or honest way. He called to express frustration, and underneath the frustration there was something else. Something younger and more confused, and I thought that was the closest he was likely to come for a while to anything like remorse. I listened to him. I told him I hoped that when enough time had passed, we could find our way back to something. I told him I loved him. He did not say it back, and that is something I will carry for a long time, and I say that not for sympathy, but because honesty requires it. Patricia called after she heard what had happened. She said, "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" I said I had told her briefly, and she had told me to handle it. She was quiet for a moment. She said she was sorry. It was a real apology, a simple one, and I received it the way it was meant. That was 8 months ago. I am sitting in my kitchen now. The countertops are still pale green. The oak tree in the backyard is coming into bud, the first green of it just beginning to show, the way it does every April. Ruth came over yesterday and we sat on the porch until it got too cold, and then we moved inside and she stayed for dinner. I made the soup Gerald always liked, the one with white beans and rosemary, and we ate at the kitchen table and talked until 9 o'clock. I have been taking a watercolor class on Tuesday mornings at the community center. I am not very good at it yet. The instructor, a patient woman named Helen, says I have an interesting sense of color, and I choose to take that as a compliment. I have painted the oak tree twice and the green countertops once, and neither of them looks quite like the thing itself, but they look like something, and for now, that is enough. I am not waiting for Daniel to come back, though I would welcome him if he did. I am not holding anything against him in the hard and bitter way that closes doors permanently, but I am also not folding myself smaller to make him comfortable. I tried that for 11 years with Renee, and it accomplished nothing and cost me quite a lot. I have stopped explaining myself to people who have already decided what I am. I have stopped being surprised by the casseroles. I live in my house, the one I painted myself, the one with the green countertops and the oak tree and the bedroom where I still sleep on my side of the bed. I own every room of it. Not just legally, I have always owned it legally, but in the fuller sense, the sense that matters more. I own my mornings and my Thursdays at the diner and my Tuesday watercolor class and my long conversations with Ruth on the porch. Someone asked me recently, a woman in my watercolor class who had heard some version of what had happened, whether I felt guilty about how things ended at the title company. About the look on my son's face, I told her I had asked myself that question. I told her what I had concluded. You cannot protect yourself and also protect everyone else from the consequences of what they tried to do to you. At some point, you have to choose. I chose myself. I chose this kitchen, this oak tree, this particular pale green that everyone said looked wrong. I would do it again. I would do it quietly and carefully and with no pleasure in it, and I would do it again.